right. Gordon, I see you're having trouble connecting to audio. If there's any help we can provide, please let us know. But I think I'm going to go ahead and get started, and we'll welcome everybody to our quarterly PFD meeting. Want to thank everyone for joining us. I'm going to start with a little bit of housekeeping. As you can see, we are recording this session, which is what we typically do to be able to share the presentations and discussion for those interested in attending who have another conflict at this time. So we will be recording the session. The recordings are uploaded on the iFish website. So for any of you who have colleagues who wanted to join who could not, I would welcome them to check out the iFish website so that they can join or watch the presentation after the fact. The other thing I wanted to mention is if you're not speaking, if you could keep yourself on mute just to eliminate any background noise while the presenter is presenting, that would be wonderful. And as you can see from the agenda, we have about 20 minutes for presentation from Charles Freeman, and then also 20 minutes for discussion. So that's the general procedure for today's meeting. And the other thing I wanted to know is that Jennifer, Dr. Lincoln is not able to join us for the meeting today. She sends her apologies. But I can let folks know that we are continuing to work on iFish 6 and hope to have a meeting venue lined up soon and hope to share updates on that back to the group, maybe at our next quarterly meeting if possible. And then other than that, let's see. Again, if you aren't speaking, if you could just put yourself on mute, that would be great. And those are the only updates I'm aware of at this time. So I would like to just take a minute to introduce Dr. Charles Freeman, who is our presenter today. Dr. Freeman is an associate professor and director of the Center for Retail and Cotton Product Development. He's currently working with the athlete engineering program on new material applications for stretch sensors to monitor and evaluate health, safety, and performance of high-risk occupations. And so he'll be talking a little bit about his work on that today. His bio is included on today's agenda, so if you want to explore a little further, you can check out the agenda. And we also have some information on the international quarterly call for those who may be new to the group. That's also featured on the agenda. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And then, Charles, I do have your presentation, and I'm happy to bring that up and forward through the slides if you'd like, or if you'd like, you can take control of the screen and then forward the slides yourself. It's really up to you.
Yeah, if you want to just share the slides, and then I'll just give you the classic next slide prompt.
Okay, sounds good. Let me just make sure that I'm on the first. All right, here we go. And I will just put that in presenter mode. There we go.
All right. Well, thank you guys very much. And thank you, Julie, Rebecca, and the team for inviting me to present here today. My background is not in fisheries. I did grow up near the beach. I love fishing. I love being on boats. But my background's in fashion design. So I have a background in fashion design, textiles, and materials, which sometimes puts me at odds when I'm working and presenting with groups like this. They're kind of like, what's a fashion designer doing working on dealing with life jackets? And where we started with this project was that in talking with some commercial fishermen and some folks that we knew down on the coast at our Coastal Research Center, they mentioned about how fishermen don't wear life jackets and they don't wear PFDs. And I said, well, why not? And they're like, well, we don't really know. And I'm like, well, there's really only two reasons why we don't wear something. And that's from our background, is that it's either uncomfortable or there's a social stigma that surrounds it that you can't wear it. Same reason why I can't wear, yoga pants to class to teach in, right? There's a social stigma that says I shouldn't wear yoga pants to teach in class. And so when we started doing this project, we really started wanting to figure out the why behind why they chose not to wear these PFDs, knowing the benefits. Next slide.
Okay. Oh, there it is. Okay.
All right. And so one of the goals of our project were that, we knew that people know the dangers of not wearing a PFD. Any fisherman you ask or any person you ask that goes out in the water, they understand the inherent risks that are involved with not wearing a PFD, even if they have them on board. So they have access to them. They're there. They know that if they don't wear them, they could run a risk of dying. Most of them don't want to die. But yet they still make a conscious decision every day not to wear or not to pick those up and put those on. And why is that? And this we're seeing again, this is very localized to the Gulf Coast and our Gulf Coast shrimping populations that are down there. Even though we have, they're working in one of the highest fatality occupations. Just excuse me one second. Sorry, I have an air conditioning unit in my office that kicks on every now and then and can be some distracting background noise. So one of our goals, we wanted to find out why they chose not to wear them. We wanted to document the activities that they do on the boat, see what they're doing, how they're interacting with the equipment, their daily activities. And then we really wanted to hear their stories about why they chose not to wear them, what they would think differently. And then we wanted to ask them, and we'll talk a little bit later about how we kind of turned our shrimpers into fashion designers to tell us what we need to have in a PFD and to ask them what would they take to do this. And then our last stage of this, designing and developing some acceptable options that could be for them. So next slide. So we went down to the Gulf Coast. We've done 3 trips down so far. And we would spend about a week to 2 weeks on the Gulf Coast before, during, and after the shrimping season. We were able to incentivize through the support in the grant project. We were able to incentivize participation. What we did find being down there, and again, a lot of these stories and information we had 10 to 12 shrimpers that actually participated in the interviews and were willing to be documented and recorded on camera. One interesting thing we found, and this is no offense to our Coast Guard partners on the call, but the thing that I would go up and ask about, would you be interested in talking to us about a PFD, or they were like, look, I get it, you're with the Coast Guard, here's my PFDs, I have this, I'm fully regulated, here's this, I'm like, no, I'm not with the Coast Guard, I have nothing to do with the Coast Guard. So we almost wanted to get shirts printed up that said, we are not the Coast Guard, please talk to us. And so, but they were really standoffish about talking with people about PFDs because of the regulations and guidelines that they can be fined for. And so we did find that they were fairly hesitant. We would go down to the docks. We spent a lot of times on the boats with them. We would be, I met a few people in Walmart parking lots. That's the only place they would be willing to talk about this, is away from their peers and colleagues. I went into some places that I wasn't sure I was going to be able to come out of in some instances. But we were down there talking with them to really just have about an hour to 2 hour interview and just talk about what they do every day, and to really kind of take back that standoffish talking about PFDs. We really got into the boat and telling shrimping stories. And the minute they started telling a lot of stories about what they do, we kind of then back ended with some PFD conversations with that. We used a questionnaire developed by Dr. Storholm out of Norway, in looking at PFD adoption in the northern Atlantic regions and fishing out of there. And so he was kind enough to allow us to use the survey, helped us with some of the modifications on it. And we were able to use that to develop our interviews. So we coded our interviews and transcripts using a qualitative assessment coding software to look for instances of words and look for occurrences of terminologies or things that we could then codify and figure out how we can use that. As I mentioned, 10 shrimpers fully completed the interview and the follow-up, so those were our data collected. Overall, we talked around 18 to 20 shrimpers, but a lot of them did not want to be on camera. They did not want to be recorded. They didn't want their names documented, and they had no interest in signing paperwork, even with a nice gift card incentivization that would come along with it. Next slide. So one of the really unique things we heard a lot about, and where we started the conversation, was on hazards and safety issues that occur on the boat. And so we started with some questions of, tell me about a time when something happened out on a boat and you were a little worried, or you were kind of scared. When's the first time you really got scared on your shrimp boat? And overwhelmingly, we see that most of the participants all mentioned at some point in time a storm occurring. In the Gulf Coast, if you're not familiar with Mississippi Gulf or the Gulf of Mexico, during the summertime when they usually shrimp from May to November, and during this time, you will have storms pop up fairly quickly. You will be, within an hour, you can have a thunderstorm on top of you, a small cell that ignites pretty quickly. And it can be pretty treacherous out there very quickly for us. It can go from easy 2 to 4 foot seas to, 6, 8, 10, 12 foot waves. And even with nets in the water, it can be pretty dangerous. In addition to the area they fish in along the Mississippi Gulf Coast across Louisiana is an extremely high traffic area. And so there are a lot of other boats that are in the area. There's a lot of large vessels that are in those areas. And so these smaller shrimp boats are oftentimes having to navigate that. And, we hear stories about being in a storm and you're surrounded by the larger shipping containers, because Gulfport is located right there. And it's a major shipping port in the U.S. You have large shipping containers coming in and out right where they're trying to shrimp and fish. And so they would say, you get caught in a storm and you got 2 or 3 of those big guys around you, it's pretty quickly they can beat you up pretty fast. And so a lot of the other issues that they were having were some safety hazard issues were with nets, when nets get twisted, caught up, hung up. I think the scariest story that I heard was one of the fishermen was talking about his nets, and he said, well, when they get hung up, you just have to climb out on the boom and fix them. He's like, you climb out there, you hang down, you tie a rope around yourself, and you just hang down. He's like, typically I will put some Ziploc bags in my pocket just in case I go overboard. I can use those for a flotation device. And I'm like, I hate to break it to you, but a Ziploc bag is probably not going to be a good flotation device for you. But even though they have a PFD on board, knowing they're putting themselves in a high-risk situation, they still choose not to wear those. Waves, obviously it's very hot in the Gulf. It can get extremely, extremely warm out in the water during the summertime, and that overheating is an issue. And then we see some other things that are typical to the boats, winches, reboarding, knives, collisions, different things like that. So next slide. So we talk about storms and weather. Some of these key hazards that we identified was how quickly that they can come up. That a lot of them just say that they don't go out now and when there's the potential for severe weather. However, they also made a note that, when the shrimp are biting and they're out there, then you have to go work. And if it's storming, then that's just the way it is. We see the one example here that a squall came up. We're probably a mile offshore, and you couldn't even see the 60 to 70 foot boats around them. And he said, they don't cut the boat off. You always keep the boat running and put your life jacket on. And so it's not until they're in a very extremely dangerous situation that they choose to wear those life jackets, and they actually make a conscious decision to put those on. And even then, you just sit there and ride the storm out. And so this issue of storms and weather, it can help to provide an impetus for providing life to put the life jacket on. But 2 of the fishermen we talked to that did not want to be recorded, they mentioned that they never wear a life jacket because if you are, as a captain of the vessel, because if you are in a storm as captain of the vessel, you're in the wheelhouse and you're trying to manage the boat. And if the boat goes down and you're wearing a life jacket, you're going to die in the wheelhouse because you can't swim your way out. And so they actually choose not to wear a life jacket when they're in the wheelhouse during a storm, because if the boat does capsize or go under, they have to be able to swim out from underneath the boat, and they're not able to do that. The same when we heard this when people are working on the nets and the lines in the evening, at night, when it's probably some of the most dangerous times to be in. They will go in the water to go under the boat to fix things, to pull a net out of a propeller or to untangle some things. And they're making a decision not to wear a life jacket at that point when they go in the water, and no other sort of flotation device to get them out of there. Next slide. When I talk about it again, as I talk about the nets, Again, we had to remove some of the language. As all of you probably know, if you've talked with commercial fishermen, the language is extremely colorful. And you know that when you work on a shrimp boat, you're going overboard. So they know at some point they're going to have to go overboard. They know they're going to get knocked overboard at some point, and they're still making these decisions not to wear life jackets. And so even though one of our participants said, you know, you can drown very easily without one, but just about every night we go to work and he watches the first shift. There's only 2 guys on the boat at night, and they fish 24 hours. So the boat's running the full time, and about every hour or so, they take a nap, they lay down, sleep for an hour, and they're out there by themselves with somebody that's in a cabin sleeping. And if they go overboard, there's no way to save them. And even then, they still don't wear life jackets while they're doing that. And so their solution to this is they just try to stay away from the edge, and which is not really a good solution because you end up by the edge anyway. Next slide. And then when we talk about reboarding, and I know we've had some presentations on reboarding, and that was really impactful. I think it was a study out of Scotland where they actually tried to have them get back on a boat in the wave pool. You know, they say once you're overboard, getting back on is almost impossible. Especially, you know, they gave the example here that, you know, if you go overboard, you know, you weigh 300 pounds. If you go overboard, you're not coming back up, and we're not going to bring you back up. They don't really have ladders on a lot of the boats. A few of the boats they said in the harbor do have ladders, but most of them do not. And their solution is that hopefully you can grab a cable or a line that falls off. You know, that if you go overboard, again, if there's a rope, if they're operating by themselves, they'll typically throw some ropes in the water to trail behind just in case they go overboard, and they can grab something and get a hold of it. Or you have to pull yourself up by the tires, which are, of course, right by the back propeller and everything, which causes another inherent danger for them. And so, next slide. So when we asked them, we said, we know that you can go overboard. You know that there's a lot of dangers and risks with this. There's a lot of really cool options, and we use the chart from the NEC on the different types of PFD options. We would show that picture chart to them, and we would say, if you were to wear one of these, which one do you think you would feel really comfortable in? We had examples of them for them to put on, to try on, to see what they liked. And even with those examples and everything, weight was a huge issue for them, that they just felt that they were heavy. Even the lightest of our options on the life jackets, or even the belt option life jackets that we would, or PFDs that we would be showing, they would still say that it just feels weighty and cumbersome. Comfort, again, the temperature and heat was a major issue for them in the Gulf Coast. And so being able to be comfortable while they're out there, and they just felt that the additional weight and the additional PFDs were causing just a slight discomfort. Fit was another major issue, especially as it relates to how they do their job, fit and movement. And we broke these out into specific categories because they typically were somewhat related, but there were very distinct notations of it has to fit tight, it has to fit close, but it can't be uncomfortable. If anything is hanging off or anything is loose, I'm going to get caught in the winch. If I get caught in the winch, I'm dead out here. If I get caught in the net and I can't get a net done properly, there's a good chance of me going overboard. I can't do my job wearing one of these. And they have this mentality that they physically can't conduct the things that they're trying to do on their day-to-day basis out there while they're wearing a PFD. Whether this is a psychological aspect or whether this is an actual physical human kinematics aspect, that's another phase of the study we're looking at. We're going to be doing some motion capture and human movement in our VR labs here on campus with fishermen and wearing different PFDs and doing traditional motions off the boat to see if there is a true kinematic difference in how they do this work. Next slide. So what they say about weight, again, I heard this repeatedly over and over. Nobody wears these. And point blank, we had one captain tell us, he's like, I am not wearing a PFD. It's just not going to happen. They're on my boat. I have them on there. I ain't wearing it. I know how to swim. I'll be fine. And when you have that mentality and, asking, he's like, well, do a lot of people feel this way? And he's like, we all feel this way. And then he's like, the only way we're going to wear it is if we got to go in the water or it is a really bad storm. And, some of the guys get a little scared and they put one on. But then we had some folks that were just, they were saying that wearing it a lot of times when the nets are down, even though you're moving about the boat, a lot of times you're stationary. You're waiting for the nets you're pulling the nets, you're monitoring, you're keeping an eye on things, you're driving the boat. And that it's just not comfortable to be around in, to stand around in, to lounge around in. And I think that we have a little bit of complacency here in the Gulf as opposed to the Atlantic, that the Gulf waters can be, while they can be treacherous at times with storms, for the most part, the Gulf is relatively calm in comparison to some of the other fishing areas we see off the U.S. And so, but they were looking for something that's just comfortable, lightweight, and even on the waist ones or even some of the small, sleeked out design PFDs that we show, they kept saying they're just so big, they're just so bulky, they're just in the way. And next slide. Again, comfort, and we get this feeling of it's just not very comfortable. I can never wear a life vest and work on a boat. They have this mentality, and that never is a pretty harsh word. And I asked them, are you sure that even if we had the best PFD that was available in the market and you didn't have to pay a dime for it, that I still can't work and wear one of those things? Again, not designed to lounge in. They'd have to be something that's comfortable as wearing a shirt if they were going to wear it all the time. It would have to make it a lot more easier for both of us if they talk about it. And I was interviewing a two-person team at that time. But again, even if it was easier for them, you have this constant feeling of they're uncomfortable, that's why I don't wear them. And they understand the risks, but now this comfort aspect is really, really important for us to understand what it would take to get them to adopt these. Next slide. Fit, the ones that are the thick with the two front pads, again, those are impossible, they feel, to work in. We interviewed a few female shrimpers that were out there, and that she said that any PFD that's on the market right now does not fit them, does not work for them at all. She commented that, said they're flat and I'm not flat. And so it's a big issue for them to find a good fit when it comes to these. It's got to be tight, yes, because you don't want to wear the real loose clothing. Because again, if that winch grabs you, that's it, you're done. So again, they have to be closer fitting, they got to be tighter, but they still have to manage that balance between being close fitting to the body without compromising comfort while they're doing daily activities and work. Next slide. So we asked some of them, we said, well, what if you were a designer and there were no limitations on what you could design, what are some things that you would do? How would you make these better? And how would you design one of these? Again, some of the design aspects we identified were the thickness and absorption. So they said it would have to be thin, but with a lot of flotation in it. So they want super, super thin and lightweight, but they also want it to have a lot of flotation, which is a challenge nonetheless. As I know, manufacturing and producing these is a big challenge for that. We have some life jackets. Again, you leaving them in the bottom of the skiff, and when you leave them in their storage containers, or if they're out in the storms or the weather, the more they get moisture into them, then the more likely they're going to increase that weight. And they're like, next thing you know, these even the orange ones that they use with the two big the styrofoam flotations in them, so you pick it up, it weighs 30 pounds. The newer ones that just go around your waist, I think that if we were something like that, more people would be willing to work in them, especially if it's something that could go around the back and be on your back. No straps. They don't want any straps. They want something zip up or elastic that would keep it pinned to your waist good, because again, they're really concerned about that winch and getting caught up in the nets and the winch and being taken over. And they say activated by falling in the water, and this was really interesting but you can't have it activated because you're getting wet all the time. And so a lot of them had concerns about the, I want to call it a brand name or anything, but we were showing them one of the Mustang PFDs that has the water activation collars. And they said, I may be interested in purchasing one of those. However, I'm just worried if I get hit with a wave or I pull one of these nets off and I get drenched, this thing pops up around my neck and I'm choking. And, you know, but they had this mentality, even though we know that way is not necessarily how the technology works. A big belt clip or something around your back. Again, we heard using it on the back quite a bit. We understand why we don't put them on the back, because if you go in the water and you're floating face down and you're unconscious, there's still a good likelihood that you're going to drown. However, they feel that having it on their back, when it's on the back, it's out of the way. And it's out of their way of the range of motion and movement in the front of when in doing what they need to do. And so the next slide. And so one of the solutions that we're currently working on, and it's in development right now, is to convert some of the, what we would call those traditional fishing shirts that you would see, the lightweight material, wicking material. We would insert into the side panels of those shirts. They typically will have a side panel that has a mesh to increase comfort and breathability. But instead of the mesh, you can put in there the micro actuators that would create inflation with it's a silicone product that creates inflation with the silicone. And you would activate that through a computer microcontroller. So you wouldn't necessarily need a gas cartridge or anything. It could pull from the air and fill that in. We're still tweaking out some of the mechanical tweaks on it. But a lot of it would be powered and operated by flexible solar panels that would be across the back. And so those flexible solar panels, while they're out there working, would be collecting energy and power. And that was what powered the small motor that would then inflate the shirt if you went overboard. Again, this is not intended to replace a PFD in the event of a treacherous situation. This would be more of a buoyancy device that if somebody did go overboard, that they could maybe stay up, you know, an extra 15 or 20 minutes until they could get a PFD or a ring that's been brought to them. In addition, in the collar of the garment, we would use flexible antennae with a Bluetooth system and a small flexible battery that's powered by the solar panels on the back. And these flexible solar panels feel just like fabric and materials, and so they're very inconspicuous. And then this could help with location tracking.
Can you check the coffee?
From a Bluetooth perspective, if you're overboard at night, we were told within 3 to 5 minutes, really, you can be 30 to 40 feet away from the boat and impossible to locate in the water, especially with waves. And so with this Bluetooth, it could hopefully help to ping a location to at least get a generalized area, as well as the antenna would be a radio antenna that other boats in the area would be able to pick up as well. The lifetime on it would last maybe an hour, but it could help to narrow down some search areas pretty quickly if you have other boats in the area and that antenna is pinging off of them when they come up out of the water. We still do have quite a bit of work to do on this prototype. We've tested the antenna, we've tested the Bluetooth system, and we're doing some corrosive testing on the solar panels now. The actuators work, but getting them into a garment is going to be our next big challenge, and that's really where we're looking at for the next challenge on this, and then getting them in the pool and seeing if, you know, somebody pushes you in the pool, if these things can actually blow up when they say they're going to do it. So we'd put some along the placket for the zip front would be the moisture indicators that would be covered underneath the placket, so that the moisture indicators, if you were splashed or things like that, they wouldn't trigger quite yet. It would take a full submersion in the water to trigger if this shirt went in. And that is all I have.
Okay, thanks, Charles. So that's absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much for sharing. And I would like to open up the floor for questions. I'm sure there are many. So if you want to throw a question out to Charles, feel free. You could either just take yourself off mute and share your question, or you could raise your hand by pressing the reactions button at the bottom of the Zoom meeting, and then just select raise your hand. Okay. Any questions? Yes. Rob? Yes.
just a quick question. That was thanks for that. That was really interesting. I'm just curious because it seems that heat exhaustion is a very real possibility for the fishermen while they're working. And have you thought about that, or maybe maybe you said it and I missed it, but do you have the consideration for that built into the garment that you're designing?
Yeah, so it would be if you've ever worn one of those Costa or PFTs, they're really super lightweight ones that fishermen typically, if you're going out on a recreational fishing trip, usually they wear those to prevent themselves from getting sunburned, right? And so it's the same material that's that. So that it would be that same type of material so that the fishermen would, that was one of the concepts of, we had a shrimper who was wearing one of those shirts. And he said, I wear this shirt or a shirt like this every day I'm out here. I wear pants because I don't want to, get, cut or whatever else. He's like, but if you could make a life jacket that fits like this and feels like this, I'm in. I'm 100% in. And so our take on it was just like, okay, well, why don't we just go do that then? They're telling us what they want. They tell us what they need. Well, let's just go make that and see if it works. And so that's kind of what the approach we took on it. Yes, heat exhaustion and weight is a huge factor, which is why we went with a silicone because it's a much lighter weight. Then if you have the plastic and things like that in there, we can do a much thinner version of that silicone to inflate. Again, our prototype is not intended to keep you out on the water for 2 or 3 days. Whereas a PFD, you may be able to hang in there for a little while. This is meant that if you go overboard, you may have a chance to swim back to the boat and would kind of assist you in getting back to the boat, or at least get to a line or a rope or something like that. Kind of an in-between between nothing and a full-on TFD.
Great.
Thank you.
Yes, thanks, Charles. Wayne, I think you have a question, and then I know there's a question from Laurel in the chat bar, but maybe we'll start with yours, Wayne.
Yes, hi. I'm with Kent Outdoors. We actually make life jackets, so I'm very interested in this. So I have a question for you. When you mentioned the different vests that were shown to the operators, and you mentioned the belt packs and such, and there are lots of very, very small, very small inflatable belt packs that are very low profile. And I'm just curious, which vests did they see? If that's something you could share.
It is. I can't remember the brand right now. We went on from the NEC. They created that guide that had the pictures of all the different types of PFDs, and so we went on and tried to purchase some that were similar to those, just so we could show as an example. I can find my purchase request. It's got the brand names and everything, because I know there were a lot of them out there that we could choose from, and I don't know if we chose yours or not.
No, that's fine. I was just curious if it was one of the, originally as belt packs came through, we did 24-gram belt packs that were frankly, a little more bulky than what I could see a fisherman wanting to use, because it in fact did get sort of in the way.
And I feel bad because I wish I would have held on to them, but I gave them away yesterday. I had them in my office, my box of PFDs, but we're actually testing in our human performance, in our human factors lab. We start testing today, where we are putting fish. We have some fishermen up here, and they are going to be doing normal tasks, wearing different types of PFDs, and we're measuring a spirometer to measuring their breathing and their exertion rates, so that we can do these tasks without a PFD, and then we can do the same tasks like moving boxes or pulling nets in and mimic those tasks with a spirometer to see if the PFD is actually causing additional exertion, so that we can show them side by side and say, well, I know you say that it's harder to work in one of these when actually your body tells us that it's not. So maybe it's just the mind telling you that it is. And then we're going to be doing some motion capture in our lab as well to compare the human movement, because with our motion capture, we can break down the skeletal features. So we can look at actual human movement and overlay the comparisons between when they're wearing a PFD and when they're not. So if you are pulling a net in, for instance, and you're pulling and lifting at the same time, if you're wearing a PFD, are your shoulders, back, and your spinal column doing something different when you have a PFD on versus when you don't? And so if we can give that information out there to them and say, hey, this is it actually doesn't affect your movement at all. You do the exact same thing. It's really not in the way.
Right.
We see that. And so that's our goal with it. But yes, I know it's a long answer to your question, but
No, that's perfect.
Yeah, no, I'm looking at the space where this box was just sitting, because I could literally just reach over and pick it up and show it to you had we done this.
No, that's fine. I appreciate that. And frankly, wish I could be there to see the testing. That sounds very interesting.
Well, I'll be more than happy to share the results, and we're going to do some
Okay,
video
great.
capture of the testing, and I'll be more than happy to share those with Julie, Rebecca, and the group, and they can feel free to send those out.
Okay. One last little add-on to my question, then I'll let somebody else talk. You mentioned that you're in generally you're in an area where rescue is fairly close at hand, and then you also mentioned, and you mentioned it, and then we laughed, but the Ziploc baggie idea. Is your intention to design something that would be an auto inflate that would have to, so that if somebody was unconscious, or is this something that you could, in fact, it could be a user-assisted product? And frankly, what I'm thinking is, is this something that if you fell in the water, it had a compartment or bladder built in, to your shirt idea, where you could simply capture some air from just by opening it up and closing it real fast. I'm thinking back to old lifeguard training, where we made life jackets out of our blue jeans. Would that be sufficient for, within the scope, I guess, of your project, or are you looking for something that is more automated?
We want an automated feature just in case somebody's unconscious, but that doesn't mean that we can't include a manual inflate option as well. And so one of the things that we were, one of our inspirations for looking at some of these options were on an airplane. The life jacket, the little plastic things they give you on an airplane, and they show you how to auto inflate that and everything else if you're going in the water. How do you incorporate some of those features into something that's much more wearable? And there's a lot of places we can hide things. So if I have a small stand-up collar and you have an inflation tube that is embedded in between that collar, you're never going to know that's there. And if there's a small tab that sticks out, that if I yank that tab and pull it, that tube comes out and I can inflate. So there's a lot of places where we can hide things in clothing that people are not going to even know that they're there.
I also wanted to mention that I have a picture of the life jackets that we used in the NEC study, if that's helpful, Charles.
Yeah,
I could show you
really helpful.
Okay. So you can see here, these are the belt packs that were used in the NEC study. I think one of them is a Mustang.
One on the left, if you're looking at your screen.
This
RS, yeah.
Yeah.
And then we had the orange one under vest. We didn't do bibs, obviously, because they don't wear bibs down in the Mississippi Gulf Coast. Those would be really hot down there. So we chose not to do bibs. We did the one in the middle, the Mustang work vest. And we also did the hero shirt that's down there on the right-hand side. And then we had, if you'll scroll down on the hybrid ones, we had some of the hybrid flotations with the straps across the top. And then the one that goes across the back too. So we have 8 different vests that we chose from some of these different hybrid options. Manual inflatable. A lot of the fishermen really liked the one on the bottom, the black one, the auto inflate with the strap down the back. If you see the one on the left there, yeah. They really like that feature of having the strap down the back that provides a little more support. But they said, if you could just keep this and this feature, maybe move these things off my chest and put them underneath my arms or somewhere that it's really flat underneath there. And so that's where we pulled some of this inspiration for the shirt from, was some of their recommendations on moving where the flotation was occurring. And thank you guys again for allowing us to use those pictures in that chart in our study. It was extremely helpful to be able to pass that to them and then lay the PFDs out for them to look at and try on and feel.
Yeah, no problem. We have a question from Laurel Kinsel from Oregon State. She had asked, is there a possibility to bring the prototype to the Pacific Marine Expo in Seattle they'll have a booth there and are hoping to have fishermen try different designs for a new project they'll be working on.
I would say this fall, no. Next fall, absolutely. Yes.
Okay.
I definitely we will have something. Again, we have the components and pieces. It's all in kind of parts and pieces right now. Now our next stage that we're moving into is building it together, as well as collecting some more information from our shrimpers. And we're launching the study. We did Mississippi first, and so we're going to be launching this study in partnership with the Sea Grant program in Louisiana and Texas. So we're going to be launching our same survey and data collection in those two states to see if we see a consistency across the Gulf Coast. And then we're also going to be translating it into Spanish and Vietnamese to see if there's a difference on these hazards and feelings towards PFDs in the different cultural communities. And so those surveys should launch beginning in November, which should coincide right about the time of the end of the season. Because we incentivize it with a gift card for our participants, we try to get it, especially right before the holidays, is a good time to incentivize them with a gift card. If you want to go buy the wife a Christmas present, take our survey and we'll get you a gift card. So, but yeah, no, Laura, thank you for that. I think that we can definitely have that down next fall or up next fall. Sorry.
Great. Let's see. Any other questions from the group? Yes. I think it's Glenn, right?
Hey, sorry, I moved my phone out there. I'm with Absolute Outdoor, Camp Outdoor. Can you hear me?
Not well, but if you want to, you could also put your question in the chat.
I'll do that.
Sorry. So while he's putting his question in there, does anybody have a question they'd like to put out there? Okay. All right. Well, when that pops up, we'll take that question. But I just wanted to mention to everyone that our next quarterly life jacket meeting will be on Wednesday, December 7th. And we actually need a topic for that meeting or a speaker. So I'm just wondering, could the group share any ideas they have? Beck, do you want to?
Hey, Julie, I just want to say we do have a speaker for December. We need
all the speakers
for 2023, though. We have a wonderful speaker, Darren Gard, speaking for December.
Oh, right.
We need 4 great people for 2023. So please send us. You can nominate yourself. You can throw someone else in the mix, but please let us know who you're thinking of.
And so Glenn's question was about the inflation method that we're looking at using, and we're examining a couple of different options, and we are looking. We've tested a little bit with a small motor fan that's powered that could fill and could pump air in or push air in through a pump. Again, it's getting enough pressure into there to fill it is the challenge that we face with that. Again, the bigger the motor, you gotta have more power that comes into it. We've also looking at some chemical options for us, so that if the activation is triggered, the microcontroller, which is basically a mini computer that's in the collar, would trigger a release of, removing a barrier between 2 chemicals, and their off-gassing, but be a safe off-gassing, would then fill the chamber from the gas that's created. So there's a few different options that we're looking at on there, and that's where we have really struggled the most. Is we're doing our best. We're trying to prevent having a CO2 cartridge, because that's what adds the weight. Or if we can have an option that is a lightweight CO2 cartridge, for how we can put that CO2 into there and spread the weight evenly, even across the back shoulders, to where that weight is now not so much a factor. What we did find that on the collar vest, having the CO2 cartridge even down or having it in different places, it adds that additional pull. And that's where we were seeing some issues. So we're looking at a few different options on that, and that is where probably, again, one of our biggest areas. The advantages for like the fan, obviously, is we know that it's going to work. We know it works well. We just have to make it small. And that's just our mechanical engineers are working on miniaturizing that. The chemical, the advantage is that it's extremely lightweight. It takes a very small amount. I would tell you which two chemicals they're looking at, but I would be speaking out of turn of my chemical engineer who partners. One thing you will find that what we have done with this project, and this is something I would, I'm going to take one quick minute and get on the soapbox if you don't mind, Julie. On this project, we have people who are in fashion design and textiles, material development. We have 3 computer scientists who work in electrical and computer engineering that develop antennae and computer systems. We have 2 mechanical engineers. We have a kinesiologist and a human factors performance individual who works on it with us. We have 2 graduate students in chemical engineering and a chemical engineering professor who's also looking at this project. We have industry partners. Drake Waterfowl produces clothing, so they're giving us advice from the manufacturing perspective on producing the shirts and things like that. And then we have people in industrial systems engineering on designing the systems that can go into producing this. And we also have extension specialists, a coastal extension specialist whose job is to communicate with the fishermen and roll safety programs out. And we have a program evaluation extension specialist who works on developing and evaluating the adoption of programs across the board. So while I'm the only one presenting, and you saw a couple of names on the title slide there, there's probably about 15 people across disciplines at the university who are all tackling this particular problem. And so, and I will say that if you want to inspire people to work on your project like this, the only thing I did was share our interview transcripts with some of them. And they were like, you have got to be kidding me. Are these guys serious? Like, I had somebody that was like, did you make this up? And I was like, I promise these are the stories they're actually telling. These are the things that they're doing. And they're like, these guys are crazy. They're stupid for doing this. And they're like, and I complain about paying $7.99 a pound for shrimp. And these guys are like risking their lives to do this. And so share your stories with people. And they're like, how can we help you, Charles, on fixing this problem for them? How can we solve this problem? And what do you need from us to help? And so, again, we have a huge team that is working on this, and they're from all different disciplines, all walks of life. And they're all focused on the fishermen and how we make it better for them. So if you're on a team out there doing this sort of stuff, reach out to your colleagues, get everybody you can on board, because that's the only way we can do this. That's the only way we can figure this out.
Thanks, Charles. We did get a volunteer for a presentation, and so Becca or Andy, I don't know if you can capture that. Good, awesome. There was an additional question, follow-up question relating to the fan and the inflation of the chamber. The question was, how will the fan inflate when submerged in water?
So that is where we would put the fan on. If you think about the back of your neck and where your spine kind of meets the base of your head, in that collar portion there is where we would locate the fan pieces and parts, and we would bring it across there because you can access it from the undercollar to pull air in. And so the idea is, again, this hasn't been tested in the water, but the idea is that if you go in, you're immediately going to start kicking and paddling up. So at least your upper torso will be out of the water for a moment from at least the shoulders up. So if we can pull that fan above to where it can just do its job, the fan would only need to operate for about 10 to 15 seconds in order for it to inflate. And it's not going to need to run continuously. So it would be a one and done kind of a thing with that. And so that's the idea, is that we can hopefully keep it. And of course, we'll have the parts encased in water, sealant, that sort of stuff. You're going to need to pull air in. So there's going to be an opportunity for that air to come and that water to also infiltrate in. So that's our theory right now.
All right. Let's see. Are there any additional questions for Charles or anything else the group wants to discuss while we're all here? Yes, Beck.
Hey, Charles, I just had one quick question. Oh, I see Wayne has one too. So mine's very short, which is how would the fisherman clean this shirt? And would it be worn next to the skin? And what happens if they want to put an oil skin over it if it's raining, things like that?
Well, the components and pieces that we're using, and this is a big challenge for wearable technologies, how do you launder it? And so that's why we went with the flexible solar panels to power, because you can actually launder those. You can wash them, dry them, everything else like that, and then they still work fine. The test we're doing now on our flexible solar materials that we have is we're looking at saltwater corrosions. We're doing spray salt corrosion on them to see how the salt water is going to affect the electronics, because you may not need it one day, on the very first day you have it out there, but you may wear it for a year and a half out there on the water. And what's that saltwater and marine environment doing to those electronics over a year? So they should be able to launder it just in regular wash cycles would be the ideal.
Great, thank you. Wayne?
Yes, just quickly, have you established a buoyancy requirement for this? Have you decided, how much buoyancy is the fisherman needing, or are you just trying to get some buoyancy?
We're just trying to get some right now. I think once we get some, at that point, I think then we can start to look at some standards and regulations as to what buoyancy requirements or minimums we would need to meet. Again, our biggest push on this is that we're not trying to replace a PFD, and that this does not take the place in
Sure.
one of those. But it's more of an accidental kind of a thing, that if something accidentally happened to you, then this would almost like a kill switch on a boat, right? That if you go overboard, at least the motor is going to stop. But yeah, we haven't really established the buoyancy yet on it. As I mentioned, we haven't really tested it in the water, but once we do, we're going to need to figure out a way to increase that buoyancy, and how much can we go with it.
Okay, thanks.
But that is definitely on our mind.
Wonderful, thank you. Let's see. Any other questions? All right. So thanks to Simon and Frankie for volunteering to present to the group in future. And as I mentioned before, just a quick reminder again that our next quarterly meeting is on December 7th. I hope everyone can join. And I think that's all we were hoping to cover today. So just thank everyone for tuning in, and I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. So, and thanks to Beck and Andy for their organization.
Yep.
I'll leave that. All right.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye, everyone.